In this session, we're going to be looking at your research, how to conduct your research, how to look for information, but also talking about your analysis of resources and your research, how to do that, what ways of showing that, and also your bibliography. So the exam board here are very specific in how they want your bibliography to look, so I'll take you through that process as well. So first of all, let's look at gathering your research. Nobody's going to be able to sit down and write their essay or their dissertation or complete their artifact without having done some research. And if they try to, well, maybe they've got a lot of information, but it's not going to look well for the marks. So you're going to have to show that you have done research, and that's where there are two types of research. There's primary and there's secondary. Now I'm going to deal with secondary first because that is the most common, that's the one where you're going to get the most information for your projects from. And primary research, you don't actually have to use that as part of your project. You should only use it if it enhances your project. So when we're talking about primary data, or sorry, when we're talking about secondary data or secondary research, this is information collected and published by someone else for a purpose that's not your EPQ. So we're talking about the internet, books, journals, newspapers, documentaries, anything that has been created for a purpose other than for your EPQ. Your primary data then is anything that's been created specifically for your EPQ, where you have collected that information, that data yourself. So here we're talking about questionnaires, interviews and observations. Now, as I said before, there is no requirement for you to use primary data in your study. Depending on what your topic is, there may not be any way for you to conduct any primary research. Okay, but if you use primary research, it should enhance your project. It shouldn't just be a shoehorned in element just because you think you should. Okay, so secondary is going to be the most common that you're going to use, that is going to be the most prevalent. Primary data, use it if it enhances your project. If it doesn't, don't try and shoehorn it in. So when we're talking about secondary data, we're talking about secondary research. What we're talking about are things like the internet. And the internet is going to be the biggest place for you to do your research. It's going to be the main source of your research. Okay, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. You can't just whip in a Google search on your question and it's going to say, here's an EPQ that you can hand in. That would be plagiarism and cheating and you will get caught. Okay, but the internet can be overwhelming. So there's things that you need to think about when using the internet to do your research. The first thing is know your website types. When the .whatever usually indicates the type of research, the type of website it is. So if you've got .edu, that's usually some form of educational institution, usually university level. .gov is a government agency. It might be AU.gov if it's an Australian one, or something like that. But if it's got .gov, it is going to be some form of government agency. .org is usually some form of non-profit or charitable organisation. .com is usually commercial, and that means that you're going to have to pay for something. And .co.uk is a UK-based commercial website. So it's really important you know what sort of website you're looking at when you are conducting your research. So for example, a .com or a .org might have a slightly biased viewpoint to whoever's paying for them or whatever the charity is or non-profit is. You'd like to think that .gov websites would be quite neutral, but still be cautious. Same with educational institutions. Never assume that because of the supposed background of the website that it's going to be neutral. There will always be some form of unconscious bias, probably. Okay, so it's important to remember that with the exception of EDU websites, they can be registered by anyone for any purpose. So you really do need to cross-check and cross-reference the information that you have gathered from the website just to make sure it's accurate. So for example, Wikipedia is always a good one to use. Wikipedia is a crowdsourced encyclopedia. That means that you can register as a Wikipedia user and you can go on and you can change the information on a web page. A good example of the current Olympics, the Tokyo Olympics, somebody went on and changed the Craig David entry, Craig David being a musician, quite big in the 90s and 2000s, and they said that he was part of the British archery coaching team and he was their chief bow selector, referencing a song that he had released in the early 2000s. Obviously this is not true, but it goes to show that anyone can go onto Wikipedia and change an entry, so you do need to check and cross-reference to ensure that you are getting accurate information. Excuse me. You also need to be thinking about how you're doing your research. So when you're doing a search, if you just type in a general search term, you're going to get hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of web pages. And you may think, well, I'll just use the top ones that come up. They must be the most popular or the most... People pay to have their website come up as the top website or the top 10 websites on a Google search or on an internet browser search. So just because it is the first one does not make it any more accurate, any more reliable, or any more valid. Okay, so to narrow down the searches, to make it more specific to what you are looking for, you need to use specific and unique terms. So rather than just typing in divorce, it might be divorce trends in the UK. Or to be more specific, divorce trends in the UK since 1970. Okay. You might be able to combine terms to get more specific results, and you can use quotation marks for exact terms. So if there's a specific phrase that you are researching, put it in quotation marks and you will only get results where that phrase comes in that particular order. And there is the advanced search function on most browser search engines as well, which will allow you to refine your search by date, by country, by language, or any number of other criteria that you might want to use. So your searches need to be quite specific or it can get very overwhelming. And I've already mentioned about the research rabbit hole. When you are given massive amounts of information to look at, it's very easy to fall down that research rabbit hole and find yourself somewhere completely different to where you intended or to do with anything to do with your project. And think about using other search engines as well. Google, Bing, they're the most common ones that are around these days, but Google Scholar is a great website for academic journals or academic texts. It's freely accessible, it indexes and has all the metadata, so publishing dates, authors, publishing institutions on academic research. There's also Library Genesis or LibGen, which looks at articles and books on various topics. It allows free access to content that is sometimes behind a paywall or is not digitized anywhere else. DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, is a website that hosts a lot of academic journals which are free to access, rather than behind a paywall or behind a password protection for particular universities. So use these different search engines as well, and again use the same criteria that you would use in Google or Bing, but these will give you more academic findings. They will give you the journals which you may not be able to access in person, to kind of narrow down that search. The internet is extremely vast, so you need to be very specific in what you're searching for, otherwise you will fall down that rabbit hole. And other forms of secondary data beyond the internet. The internet is obviously going to be that the main source of information for you. It's easy to access. You've got your phone, you've got the computers in school, but you do need to show that you have used a range of sources. So things like books. We have a library. It's that building that's full of books. Use it. You can also, restrictions permitting, might be allowed to go to, say, UEA to use their library, or other university libraries. There's the public library. It's free. There's one in Wyndham. There's one in, I think there's one in Attleborough. That might have closed. There's the one in Norwich. But you can use your A-level textbooks. You can use reference books, biographies, any form of book you can use in your research, but still double check, cross-reference, back up your information. Academic journals are great. These are from university PhDs, lecturers, etc., who are very narrow in what they're researching, so they can be quite specific. Most can be found on Google Scholar as well as in university libraries. Some are open access, but some do require payment as well. And as I said, academic journals, you can find the hard copies, but you can also find digital copies as well. Don't forget about newspaper articles. They can be used as a good form of getting current information, but again, be aware that they may be biased or sensationalized, because newspapers want to sell papers. They want to get clicks on their website. And a lot of newspapers still have a digital archive where you can go back and look at prior editions. Some go back further than others. Some have digitized their entire archive, some have not. Some require a payment or a subscription, some do not. So just be aware of that when you're looking at newspaper articles. And don't completely bypass TV programs and documentaries. If you're doing a particularly socially inclined project, look at documentaries. Look at what's already out there, but again, be aware that they may be very sensationalized, because again, they want people to watch it, but they can give you some information as well. Now, your primary data, as I said, primary data is not a requirement for the EPQ. If you're doing something on ancient Greece, you're not necessarily going to be able to get primary data on it. You might be able to get an interview with an academic, but that might be the extent to it. And academics are very busy, so you may not get a response from them before your deadline. But if primary data is going to enhance your project in some way, that it's going to give you contemporary and up-to-date information about what you're studying, do use it. So things like questionnaires. These can be done online. SurveyMonkey, Microsoft Forms, Google Forms, all of those are free online questionnaire programs that you can use, and you can use a mixture of open and closed questions. An open question is where you're asking somebody's opinion or something, where they write their response to you. It's usually longer answer questions. And you've got closed questions, which tend to be more multiple choice or scaled questions, where people select from a range of answers. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. Open questions tend to be harder to analyse. Closed questions only tell you what, they don't tell you why. You could use a combination within your questionnaire as well. Interviews. There are a number of different types of interviews, and if you do get to interview someone, you do need to be very careful with the ethics of it and the sort of questions you're asking. So it might be that you use a structured interview where you have a set of questions that you ask and you stick to those questions. They can be open or closed questions. Unstructured interviews are where you perhaps have an initial question, or you have a couple of questions that you're going to ask, but a majority of your questions will come as a response to whoever you're interviewing's answers. And again, you could do your interviews group or solo, but do be very careful with interviews. They can be done in person, restrictions permitting, or they could be done via video call and things like that. But check with your mentor regarding the use of primary research and primary data in your project, just to make sure that you are being safe and just to make sure that you are not causing any harm to any participants. Now, this is the important thing, recording your sources. So you can't just kind of do your research and forget about it and not think about it in any way, shape or form. You have to keep a record. This is how you are going to show the marker, your mentor, the examiner, that you have used a range of sources in your research, that you haven't just done one internet search, used Wikipedia or something like that. You've used a range of sources. So a bibliography is basically the list of secondary research that you have done. What websites you visited, what documentaries you looked at or watched, which journals you read, what books did you use. So you're providing that list. But I would say do it as you go rather than at the end of your project. Keep an ongoing record. That way you don't then get to the end and go, oh, I haven't got my bibliography, and you've got to try and find the websites that you used or find the research that you used. The exam board require you to use the Harvard system to construct your bibliography, and I will show you what that means. There are lots of different ways of conducting your bibliography, but the exam board require it in the Harvard system. When it comes to your project, your bibliography should be a separate section in your folder. So it's not part of your dissertation, it's not part of your artifact, it's a separate document. Okay. So what is the Harvard system? It's a very specific way of writing your bibliography. And in your workbook, you have got examples of all the different secondary sources that I've talked about, and I'm going to look at them briefly now. But just as a reminder, it's in your workbook to show you, which shows you how to write your Harvard system bibliography. Now you can do it alphabetically if you want to, you could do it chronologically if you wanted to, you could do it completely randomly if you wanted to. It doesn't matter, but the information required, it does matter. So if you're using a book, then the information required is we need to know who wrote the book, when they wrote it, what was the title of the book, if it's got an edition, so some books might be the 3rd edition, 5th edition, might be the 1st edition. If it doesn't have an edition, that's fine, you can just ignore that. Where it was published and who the publisher was. Okay, and this is what it should look like. As you can see on the screen, that's the order that it needs to be in. Printed journals and newspapers, very similar. Who wrote it? When did they write it even? What was the article title? Where was it published? So this would be the name of the journal or the name of the newspaper. Volume and issue. So all journals will have a volume and issue number. And what were the pages in the newspaper or the journal that this piece of information came from. Online journals, very similar, but you also need to include when you accessed it and when you do the title of the journal. You don't need to put the web page, you just need to indicate that it is in line, and you can do that through putting brackets after the journal title. So it may be that perhaps you won't have page numbers on this, but you should still have the volume and issue number. But the important thing is to set is the date accessed, and that is because anything online can change. It might be that the article gets put behind a paywall, or it becomes unavailable, or it's withdrawn, or something along those lines. But either way, it is important that you put down when you accessed it, not when it was published. That's going to be for earlier in there, but when you accessed it. Same goes for ebooks. Which ebook you got it from. Now, I don't imagine many of you will be using ebooks, but I put it on there just in case. Web pages. So you may not have all of this information when from your website, but the owner of the website, who runs the website? So is it Wikipedia, or is it a university? What is the website? The website page, the year, if you can, the year it was published. This is usually showing up on a blog or something like that. The web page itself, the URL address, which this is again is a reason why to do it as you go rather than leaving it to the end. And again, the date that you accessed it. Okay, because again, web pages go down, web pages get changed. So we need to know when you accessed it. TV shows and documentaries, very similar to what we've done before. You want the title of the episode, if there is one. Year of transmission, so when was it first put on TV or streaming service. Title of the TV show, series and episode number, if available. If it's a one-off, you won't have that. And the name of the channel or streaming service that you accessed it from, as well as the date that you watched it. Okay, now that's an awful lot of information to take in on a 20-minute video, so it is in your workbooks for you to access when you get to the point of starting your bibliography. The next thing to talk about is the analysis table, and this is important. It's another document, a separate document to your bibliography, which shows the examiner that you are, or the marker, that you are being critical of the research that you are using. You're not just blindly accepting something because it came from a university or because Google said so. Okay, that you are actually thinking about it. Can I trust this? Is this valid? So it is a separate document. It goes in the same section as your bibliography, but it's a separate document to your bibliography and to your project journal. Okay. And as I said, it shows the examiner that you have thought about the information you're using and not just accepting it blindly. But again, do it as you go. Don't leave it to the end. That way you can determine whether or not a piece of research is useful or not useful to your research. So your analysis of data, the analysis of research should also include bits that you kind of go, yeah, it's interesting, but it doesn't really fit in with what I'm doing. Okay. So how to analyze your research. So after you've kind of looked through it and kind of taken some notes from it and kind of gone, yeah, okay, there's stuff here that I can use. To analyze it and check whether or not it's reliable, valid, etc., you want to ask yourself some key questions. So first of all, where did it come from? So for example, a university website is going to be, or journal is going to be more valid, more reliable than Wikipedia. Okay, Wikipedia is open source, universities, there's peer review and all the rest of it. Okay, was it useful to your project? And how was it useful? And if it wasn't useful, why wasn't it useful? So it might be, again, if we fall down the rabbit hole of research, it might be that you find something that's really interesting, that's linked to what you're doing, but it's not specifically about what you're doing. So you can kind of go, well, it was interesting and it talked about this, that and the other, but it doesn't really answer the question or the parameters of the project that I'm completing. Okay. To think about the reliability. Can you trust this source? Is it an open source piece of research, or is it from a reputable, peer-reviewed source? And this is the important bit. This is the bit where people do lose marks, or don't gain marks I should say, is that they don't show cross-referencing. Have you got other pieces of research, other things that you've looked at that say the same things or that contradict it? Have you got some way of validating the information within that source? Okay, and not just by who wrote it, but is this backed up by other people? And sometimes you can get that from the referencing within the source itself. So for example, at university level, they will have references to sources that they used in conducting their research. Newspaper articles don't tend to have that because they don't need to. Wikipedia has referencing as well, so you can check the information on there. I'm not saying don't use Wikipedia, it just shouldn't be your only source. And finally, did your source lead to any further research? Did it identify a new question or a new route that you could take in your project that you want to explore? Okay, so those are sort of questions you need to ask yourself about your research. But as I said, this is a separate document, so we need to look at ways of showing this to the examiner. Now, the first one is a table. And now, again, this is the most popular format to use. It's not the only one, but it's the most popular. So it identifies a source, you talk about its usefulness, you talk about its reliability, any cross-referencing, and moving forward, how are you going to use this source, this research in your project? This is very clear, it's easy for your marker and examiner to follow, and it's straightforward. It makes sure that you've got everything there. The other option is a paragraph. Same information, just written in prose. Okay. Now, again, it's fine. You can do it that way. You can talk about it's more conversational, but it does mean that your examiner has to really wade through to make sure that you are doing all the elements that you need to do. But it is your choice. You can do the table or you can do the paragraph. Either way, you must have the analysis of secondary data. You cannot just ignore this. If you don't have it, you will limit the marks that you are able to have.